16th, 2023, produced by Ken and Mary Richardson Consulting.
All right. Well, welcome to the Love and Loving Action Steps workshop. And I'm Mary. I've been talking to you all anyway, so we won't go through all of that. But I'm really excited about this workshop. I don't think we can practice too much loving. That when it's coming from our heart and when it's, not necessarily coming from that place where we are fantasizing about love, but it's coming from true loving. I don't think we can ever do enough of that for ourselves and for others around us. But I truly believe love is the greatest healing energy that is out there. Again, when it's coming from our heart and when it's coming from our truth, it is just the greatest energy that's out there that helps us and I believe helps others to heal. Whether we know the person or not. Love is creation. I believe out of that place within our heart that from a true loving place, we become creative in the ways that we show our love. We become creative in the ways we receive our love and receive loving from others. Love is thought, love is action, love is energy, love is intent. Love is not a feeling. All feelings are experienced in love. So sometimes, there may be a need for, if I saw Ken doing something that was hurting him, from a loving place, I would go and sit down and talk with him. Not from a critical place or judgmental place or any of that, but I would definitely, approach him from a loving place and be able to confront whatever the issue is. So I may have fear when I'm, concerned fear when I'm in love. I may have anger when I'm doing something that is loving, as well as I may have joy when I'm doing something as loving. Pain is probably an easier one to experience, especially if there's been any loss in a relationship or a change in a relationship, or you see a friend or loved one that is hurting. You may, from that true, compassionate, loving place in your heart, feel some pain for them. So all feelings are experienced in love. In codependent relationships, which have nothing to do with love, we will take from others to fill ourselves up, or we're going to avoid others because we're afraid. But codependence, it's like remembering codependence is the compulsive, fearful way in which we are relational, which is why it then ends up becoming a fear addiction. Now, primarily, we are afraid of that shame, getting re-triggered in our lives and all the feelings that go along with that, plus the messages that we're not enough, something's wrong with us, all of that. So the greatest fear in that is going to be that fear of shame reoccurring in our lives, which is basically when we then jump into our codependent behaviors. The patterns and characteristics that are there around codependence are all fear-based thoughts and behaviors. So codependence is a compulsive, fearful way in which we are relational. So when we're coming from fear, we've got these two parts of our brain that are engaged at this time. When we're coming from fear, we're in that parasympathetic system, that fight, flight, or freeze, that survival part of our brain. We're starting maybe even to release a little bit of adrenaline in there. But that is all going to be story. Fear is a fantasy about the future, about all the bad things that are going to happen. The ways we scare ourselves. Fear is always future, so it's always a form of fantasy that is there. And so when we're in that survival part of our brain, we actually shut down the wiser part of our brain, which is that little mohawk area in the frontal lobe. That is where we're able to conceptualize love, conceptualize a higher power, where we have our wisdom, our maturity, where we're able to be right-sized. When we are activating that survival part of our brain, that wise part of our brain shuts down, because our brain doesn't know any difference between real or perceived danger. So if we're scaring ourselves, our brain goes into action. Our bodies go into action. We start to release that adrenaline. But when we're doing that, because now we're in survival, we shut down that wiser part of our brain. In loving, recovering relationships, we practice loving boundaries. Boundaries are about what is okay and not okay for me to experience. They're not about walls. They're not about rules or limitations. They're going to be what is okay and not okay for me to experience. So in loving, recovering relationships, we practice loving boundaries. We're able to communicate our boundaries. We're able to talk about them. We're able to share with those people that are close to us what is okay and not okay for us to experience. If they honor that, then we get to develop intimacy with that person. We get to develop trust with that person. Also in loving, recovering relationships, we lovingly give without fear. We lovingly give without needs or expectations of outcomes. Once we have those needs involved, then we're going to be back in that fear. We're going to be back in our codependence. If I need to have you act and be a certain way, and I paint expectations around that and paint a picture around it, it's never going to turn out the way my movie is going on. Same thing for myself. If I paint that same picture for myself, I'm never going to show up to the perfection this movie demands, which then takes us back into that fear, back into our codependence. So when we can love and give and be in a relationship and experience relationship without any fear, without any needs, without any expectations, and that we're able to lovingly communicate with another human being, man, we get good relationships. They're really healthy relationships at that point. We also want to know that, we can receive with love as well. And so whatever is given to us, we don't judge, we don't analyze, criticize, we just see it as always enough. There may be, somebody that we really love and care about, that they are truly from their heart doing the best that they can do. Now, we may desire more from that person, and we can communicate that, but we also want to be able to receive whatever it is that is given as enough. Part of, before I go into the next slide, part of all of this is, in practicing what would be called loving acceptance. Acceptance always means that we have judged something, that we have criticized something, that we are needing to now figure a way out to accept it. Because acceptance is just acceptance. It's like if you have a white piece of paper, you're accepting that's a white piece of paper. Even though you may desire a blue piece of paper, you can still accept it's a white piece of paper in there. So acceptance is really important for us to be able to, kind of acknowledge. It's like I need to be able to accept, people that are challenging for me. I need to accept them for who they are. So I know then, how do I engage my loving boundaries for myself and for them? Loving acceptance is, instead of, because sometimes with acceptance, we can kind of do that with a little bit of attitude. It's like, okay, I'm going to accept you for who you are, but I don't like it, kind of thing. Loving acceptance is really working now to bring some love into that again, this person may be doing the best they can do. I don't have to agree with it. I don't have to like it. I don't have to really want that in my life, but I can lovingly accept it with that person. So once we are able to do that, the next step in that is what is called loving allowance. So loving allowance basically is where I have not had any criticism or judgment about the person. I'm lovingly allowing them to be just who they are. I'm lovingly allowing me to be just who I am. I think when we can lovingly allow ourselves, we can then take that next step and lovingly allow another person just to be who they are. So without judging them, that's the big key in this one. So loving allowance is the conscious and is conscious and active moment by moment practice of lovingly allowing everyone and everything to be exactly as they are at any given time. And to do so without judgment or condemnation, resulting in fear and anger and possibly self-shaming. When judgment and its condemnation are present, we must then continue with the process of forgiveness and acceptance. So a little bit, I talked about acceptance, a little bit on forgiveness. I've done some workshops on forgiveness, but I really love, there was a book that I was reading many, many years ago, but it was a gentleman's dissertation on looking at the Aramaic sayings, readings, writings of Jesus and translating them. Aramaic being more of a sound language, sort of like the old George Carlin thing where, you could say, shit in 20 different ways and it all means something different. It's a musical language. It is something that has a little bit different meaning. And so he would take some of these different sayings and from the original Aramaic and write different versions of what they could mean. But one of the things that was in there that I learned was on forgiveness, that in Aramaic, and I'm paraphrasing, but it means to untie. And that made a huge difference for me. I came from a lot of trauma and I wanted to be able to move into a place of being in forgiveness because I didn't want to carry around that sack of resentments that I had around the trauma that I experienced. And so how I saw that for myself is I needed to emotionally untie from those people that had harmed me and to be able to forgive them. Our memories never go away, so they're always there. It's not about excusing a behavior or saying no big deal, it's okay. Excuse me. It is about emotionally untying from somebody. So when we can practice that acceptance and then we can practice that forgiveness, we can then have the opportunity to move into the loving allowance. So, as I said, in loving allowance, there's no judgment to begin with. And therefore, no forgiveness and acceptance is required. So, if you feel the judgment, just know you go back to those steps, the acceptance and the forgiveness. You may need to work, if you're in a 12-step program, you may want to work the 12 steps on those, on whoever that person is, to be able to get to a place where you can be in forgiveness and acceptance with that person. But loving allowance does not necessarily like something, but we choose to love it whether we like it or not. And again, without judgment. That's the hardest thing to do. I like to look at loving allowance as like we see with God's eyes. We see with God's heart. We love with God's heart. And so we try to see from a higher place within us with loving allowance. Now, I don't know about you, but there were a lot of people that this was so hard for me to do. I've done this, for me, I'm 12 steps. So I've done the steps a number of times, over and over and on a lot of different people. And sometimes I've worked the steps a few times on the same person. Just being able to move to a place where I could be in acceptance and forgiveness. Um, I think we can move into loving acceptance regularly in our lives, that we can approach acceptance from a loving place. And the loving allowance really takes that conscious intent. Am I going to start my day off today lovingly allowing me, and being there for myself and not having any judgments like, oh my gosh, did you put the right clothes on? Did you, comb your hair the right way? Did you show up this way? Are you going to, not going through and scaring myself or criticizing myself, but just starting out that day as God sees me, and trying to the best of my ability to stay there the rest of the day. That is a challenge, I think, for a lot of us, because those of us that come out of trauma, we have that toxic shame. Anybody who was abused, abandoned, neglected, or enmeshed with physically, emotionally, sexually, spiritually, or intellectually that is all trauma, has toxic shame. So when there's another individual that has acted shamelessly in our lives, denying their own shame that they're making a mistake, from the time we were born up till today, when somebody is acting shamelessly, that energy of shame is going and being projected to us. Now, as children, we had no boundaries. So it was just like sponges, soaking all that up. And then all those messages, oh no, I'm a bad little girl, or I just did that wrong, or I made him mad again. I should have cleaned my room. I should have, we start scaring ourselves as little kids. Or maybe if I go up and I'm cute to mommy or daddy, they won't be so mad. Or if I go do the dishes, or if I, we start doing all this as little children, trying to manage that toxic shame, trying to manage being shamed again. And so when that has been our heritage, so to speak, that we have brought into our lives, loving allowance is such a healing place to live from. And I think we go in and out of it. If we're really consciously trying to focus on this, then it's something that we kind of move in and out. We're humans, we make mistakes, we're fallible, we're not going to do anything perfect. But having just that conscious intent makes all the difference in the world. So the next place of moving with this is what is called loving adoration. And it's sort of, in a way, how we're taking that loving allowance and putting all of this into action. So we've moved from the loving acceptance, where there's somebody signing in here. We've moved from the loving acceptance and we've gone into the loving allowance, and now we're at the loving adoration. So loving adoration is the conscious and active investment, moment by moment, of my heart, and active loving into all that we see, into everything that I see. And again, like I was saying, that is the challenge too, for those of us who come out of trauma, to be in that place. But there is an upliftment energetically within us when we're able to go there. So shame, toxic shame, definitely keeps us weighted and heavy and sort of close to the earth. It's a heavy, heavy feeling. It's why people can feel depressed when they're in toxic shame. They can feel like they've lost all their energy. They, can be critical of themselves and wanting to isolate. So when we are practicing these things, there is an upliftment of energy that will take place. And you'll feel that lighter amount. Just changing our thought. I remember reading a quote by Marianne Williamson, and it said, if you don't like the way you feel, change the way you think. Our thoughts create our feelings. So if I don't like the way that I am emotionally feeling during the day, I need to pay attention to how I'm thinking. And I can change my thoughts. I may have to change them every 30 seconds for a while until it sticks, but I can change my thoughts. So loving adoration is a way of putting this all into action. So in loving adoration, we are consciously choosing to lovingly adore all that we see and don't see. It is the next step after loving allowance. As I was saying, this can be a challenge, as I said, with the people who have hurt us. And the best we can do, sometimes the best we can do is to see the loving adoration as our higher power may see it. So we try to, as I was saying before, we try to see through our higher power's eyes. We try to love through our higher power's through our higher power's love, and put that into action. Sometimes that's the best that we can do with that. So you think of, people, if you're having difficult times with them, and you're just mad and hurt and don't feel heard, and are having challenges, even feeling like you're communicating and with them, and it's coming out. You can hear it coming out sideways within yourself. You can hear it coming out sideways from them. It's like the shames talking to each other, as opposed to the two people. One of the tools in healthy communication is when we recognize that we are over a 3 or 4 on a 10-point scale of intensity, so emotional intensity, you need a timeout. It means we've gone back into that survival part of our brain, that parasympathetic system. It means that we cannot hear anything that's not going to be filtered through our trauma. And so taking a break, it takes the brain at least 30 minutes to renormalize from an adrenaline flush. So once we've, let adrenaline and we're go into the brain and we're over that 3 or 4 on that 10-point scale of emotional intensity, we need at least a 30-minute timeout so that our brain chemicals get back in order, let alone our thinking get back in order, and we get clear on what it was we were really wanting to say to the person to begin with. So then we can use the healthy communication. This is what I heard you say, and this is how I felt about it. This is what I saw you doing, and this is what I felt about it. Clean communication. So in short, loving allowance and loving adoration is the attitude or way we approach all. And I put all instead of all humans, I just put all, because I think it has to do with our human relationships, has to do with relationships we have with our pets. We have relationships we have with our environment, relationships we have with groups that are out there, or philosophies, or, I think it can be practiced in all ways. There's some political views somebody may not agree with. That's a philosophy, around politics. You want to still approach it from a place of loving allowance and loving adoration, to allow that viewpoint to be out there in the world. I don't have to act on it. I don't have to agree with it. It doesn't have to be something I need to do anything with, but I don't have to also judge it. It's out there because somebody believes in it. They have every right to believe in it. looking at our environment, and how we treat our environment and what we do with that. We don't have to agree with all the findings that are out there or all the debates that are out there around, global warming or no global warming or, any of those kinds of things. But we can have an attitude of loving allowance and loving adoration, of seeing it in the way our higher power sees it, which is not going to be judgmental at all. Judgment is about fear. And what I know, at least for me, my higher power is about love. And so if there is a judgmental higher power, that to me doesn't even make sense, for me, in that, because my God is not a God of fear. My God is a God of love, but there are people out there that may have a God of fear, and they have every right to do that, and so allowing those things to be. Now, I really wanted to focus on this today because it's so, one, we're moving back into, there's a lot of things, auto worker strikes going on right now. There's different things that are going on. We're going into another political arena. We're going into also, the holidays are coming up. All of these things that can trigger judgments and fear. And so this seemed like a good time to be doing this workshop where it's like, okay, maybe we can even approach all of this from a different place. So continually increasing loving communication, always continually increasing our loving communication and our skills at being able to communicate in a loving way is how we express loving allowance and loving adoration to all everywhere. And again, that communication is so simple. I really, codependence so much can feel so complicated, because it involves our trauma and the results and the consequences of our trauma, whether that's the abuse, the abandonment, the neglect, or the enmeshment. And so sometimes it's helpful to keep some of the tools very simple. And I think loving communication is a very simple tool. Everything's in I statements. My feelings are in I statements. What I'm seeing or hearing is in I statements. This is what I see you doing. This is what I hear you saying. And this is how I feel. It's all in I statements, and without any shame, blame, judgment, criticism, analyzing, teaching, sarcasm, without, bringing any negative aspects into the communication. So also, if you're just looking at, simplicity again, fear versus love, fear is going to come from the survival part of our brain. Love is going to come from the wise part of our brain. It's very simple. We're going to be in one or the other, depending on how we're thinking. So our intentional thoughts are important. That doesn't mean that we shove down feelings around our trauma. That doesn't mean that if I'm angry at Ken about something that I minimize my anger or shove down my anger. That means I lovingly communicate it to him. That means if I'm going through and doing trauma work, that, first and foremost, I am showing up in a loving way for myself and allowing myself to move through that trauma work, have those feelings I never was able to have as a little girl, and continually love myself through that. There'll be time down the road if I am moving to a place then of being able to have acceptance and forgiveness around that trauma. And there's some traumas that are just too hard to accept and forgive in a short period of time. It just takes time. But again, forgiveness meaning to emotionally untie myself from that person, that situation, that experience, to where that toxic shame gets reduced down to something that doesn't control my life, that doesn't have power. And so then I am more readily able to lovingly communicate with those people around me and to lovingly communicate with me. Of course, first it starts inside, and then as we do it inside, we're able to do it more and more on the outside. So continually increasing loving communication with all life everywhere. In this case, it's the acknowledgement and loving allowance of all life everywhere in the conscious, active, and continuous communication and expression of loving adoration, including conscious gratitude. Remember when I got clean, hearing over and over, have an attitude of gratitude. There's always something you can feel grateful for, which again is something that just naturally is uplifting. There are certain things that just will rise us up and bring us into a more uplifting state of mind. Gratitude is one of those as well. To all life everywhere through our thoughts, words, language, body language, behaviors, and attitudes, collective internal energy about someone or something. I was sharing with Ken earlier about that I had spoken to a group of people, and we were talking about the fourth step, in where we take a thorough inventory of ourselves around resentments we have and our reactions to those resentments. And I said it was interesting how when some of that was being shared, there was a lot of negativity that was towards the person that the resentment was about, as opposed to trying to help the person deal with their reactions towards the resentment. I don't know if that makes sense. So, it is just one of those things that is very different. We want to always be accountable first for ourselves, for our actions and behaviors. The more that we're doing that, the more we're able to then, in a healthy, mature way, deal with those traumas that happen to us and be able to address those and show up for the little ones that are inside of us that experience those traumas. Most of with 12 step is, I believe anyways, is that we walk in, I don't care what the 12 step program is, but we walk in our kid, either in the wounded child or the teenager. And that a lot of what we learn through recovery is how to develop that loving self-parent. That loving self-parent is who puts our boundaries into action and engages them. Our loving self-parent is who puts, loving communication into action, loving adoration into action, loving allowance into action. That is our healthy self-parent that does those things. That will sit down and make sure that we're getting prayer and meditation time and connecting with our higher power. That is the loving self-parent that engages all those healthy tools. And that is the part of us that we keep strengthening through recovery over and over. And this is just another way that gets done. So how do we put the loving adoration into action? In this case, the question is, am I going to be passive or active in lovingly allowing, lovingly adoring, and lovingly communicating with all life everywhere, including myself? Am I going to be passive or active in practicing and expressing the presence of God? To me, that what I was saying earlier, again, the more that we can see through our higher power's heart, see through our higher power's eyes, see others as our higher power sees them, it makes it a lot easier to be able to emotionally untie from those people. People who have been hurt are going to be the ones who hurt others. Now I was hurt. I didn't hurt others in the same way that I was hurt, but there were some of the ways that I did. For myself, I had to, be able to look at my mom was a rager and violent. Well, I kind of swung over to that opposite extreme and barely disciplined my kids because I didn't want to treat them the way that I was treated. That was still harmful. That's neglect and abandonment, and so I had to deal with those things, even though I didn't do what it was that my mom did, so that, I was still hurtful and harmful to my children in that way. Um, so sometimes we may go to that opposite extreme. And I remember being told over and over 180 degrees from sick is still sick. That opposites don't always work. We want to find something that's coming more from that loving self parent that is connected to our higher power. That's where our wisdom and our truth is going to come from. So this is from an article that Ken and I had written many years ago, but nearly all desire love and loving. We have heard how love heals all wounds, that love is the answer. Love fills the heart and soul, that we are here to learn how to love and be loved. There are numerous love songs played on the radio at any given moment, and books and movies about love. In many spiritual teachings, it's said that love is the answer. We're surrounded with TV and magazine ads that promise if we dress a certain way or use a particular product, we will find love. Or if we look a particular way, have the right credentials, the right car, then we'll be lovable. Human beings love love. It is the holy grail to love and be loved. That's from Is It Love or Codependence? And that was such a, we had written that for a Valentine's Day article for a newspaper. And it was just an interesting thing to go through because there is the fantasy story of love that we can go into, which is referred to love addiction. And so we can go into romance addiction or love addiction. And love addiction doesn't have to be with a romantic partner. It can be we are love addicted to our children. We are love addicted to a friend. We're love addicted to our pets even. I have seen that happen. So love addiction doesn't have to be romantic in nature, but it is that fantasy of what love is and what it's going to look like. So then we're going to build those expectations. We're going to build those needs inside. We're going to build that story of what it's supposed to look like. And then we're going to be disappointed because it will never show up in that way. So then a tendency can then be, okay, love is too painful, so I'm going to go over here. I'm going to be love avoidant. I'm going to not want anything to do with love. When neither one of them, they all only have anything to do with is fear and shame. Neither one of them have to do with love. And so that place of really right sizing love, like what is it truly? Not the stories, not the songs, not the TV commercials or the movies or any of that, but what truly is love. And so that place of moving from the loving acceptance to the loving allowance to that loving adoration and loving communication, that is how we're going to experience and put into action true love. So these are some examples of love and loving action steps within ourselves. Now we could come up with a whole lot more. These are just a few. The first is loving self-care emotionally, physically, intellectually, sexually, and spiritually. So again, loving self-care is not going to involve scaring ourselves some way, or I'm going to do this because I want to do it and I don't care what you think. So using, crazy communication. This is about lovingly showing up for ourselves. How am I going to care for myself? From that loving self-parent, how am I going to care for myself emotionally? How am I going to show up and care for myself physically? How am I going to show up and care for myself intellectually, sexually, spiritually? Emotionally is probably the hardest one to do in all of these. Because showing up for ourselves and having healthy, loving, emotional boundaries, again, that's had to do with what's okay and not okay for me to experience. When we're in that place emotionally, this is about how we can share feelings, how we can hear feelings, and how we can process feelings. So when I'm showing up for myself in a loving way emotionally, I want to make sure I can do that with myself first. I want to make sure I can hear my own feelings. I can breathe into my body. I can see where those feelings are sitting. I can address them, name them, talk about them. Even if I'm having trouble coming up with what is the name of that feeling, I can talk about the messages that are driving it. And sometimes that can help me get to what the feeling is. I can process my feelings with myself. I can share it. I can engage in that within myself. Now, the more I'm practicing that with me, the more I'm able to practice that with you. But if I'm practicing it with you and I'm not doing that for me, then it's going to be an intellectual exercise as different from a heart exercise. So when you come from that place of really lovingly being able to share emotionally with another human being, you want to come from your heart, not from your head. We can talk intellectually. I think I feel pain about that. I think I feel angry about that. I think I feel, we can talk intellectually, but you want to be able to feel it. Breathe into your body. Breathe into your body. Feel, where is that feeling resting? What does it look like, smell like, feel like? What are the messages? So you can get to know your emotional body as well as the rest of you. Physical can be anything, in lovingly caring for ourselves. We can, around nutrition, around sleep, around how we take care of ourselves, what we put in our bodies, how we treat our bodies. Do we work ourselves too much? You can look at ways of what does that look like physically for myself. Intellectually, which has to do with not only our thinking and the way we think. Some people are what's called introvert processors, some are extrovert processors. So extroverts get their questions answered while they're talking. So they can process and get to their conclusions while they're talking. Introverts need to take the information, go sit with it, then they can come back and talk about it. So even that's a little bit different. In intellectual also has to do with our creativity. It has to do with our values. It has to do with our philosophies. So when I can emotionally show up for myself, what I was talking about, like even, with different philosophies that are out there, there's probably thousands and thousands of philosophies that are out there, and, probably hundreds and hundreds of political views. I don't know, that so many different things, because we're all individuals. We're all going to see things differently, and have our thoughts on that. But knowing what that is for ourselves, then if somebody has a different view, that's not going to get us off kilter. If we have good intellectual boundaries for ourselves around our own philosophies and how we see life, then it's okay for others to have differing opinions. It's just, that's theirs. This is mine and I feel safe with this and comfortable with it. I had when I was in college, I had a philosophy teacher, and he was so much fun. It was right in the beginning, first couple of years of college. And he had said, I'm going to teach you about all the different philosophers that were out there. And he said, and as I'm teaching you about all the different ones, I'm going to become them. So he's going to teach and act out their philosophy. And he said, you're going to do one or two things. You're either going to strengthen your own, or it's going to challenge yours and you may make some changes. And that always has stuck with me, that when I come across, people with differing views, it's like, okay, that if I'm reacting to somebody's differing view, then I need to look at myself. Is that challenging me because I need to change something? Is it challenging me because I'm afraid? Usually we react, reaction comes, fear is always involved in reaction. So I need to be able to look at that so that I can move back into what is right for me. How do I lovingly self-care in that area? Sexually can be anything from, you know, I am a woman, and so, I am going to adore and love and have gratitude for this female body that I was created into, and who I am in that. So it can be about our gender and celebrating that. It can be about, there's differing views on that as well. So somebody may have, celebration of how they see themselves sexually, or non-binary, but being able to love themselves from that place. It also can be about how we lovingly self-care in while we are being sensual or sexual. What is okay and not okay for me to experience? How do I lovingly communicate that to a partner in that way? Spirituality, again, like I, have mentioned this, that there are so many different religious and spiritual beliefs that are out there. And to me, I think for me, my higher power, God is so big and so creative. Just in my personal belief that, you know, everything I see and don't see, that is out there, is created by my higher power. So I don't know how other people are talked to by their higher power. I only know how I am. And that's all I can go by, and lovingly allow other people to have their own beliefs in that. But when it's strong within here, I don't have to debate it. I don't have to argue it. I just have to go, okay, that's how you believe, and I'm glad that your higher power speaks to you in that way, that you have that relationship, um, without having to change mine or debate theirs in that. So number two, boundary defining, which is a lot of what, I've been talking about with this, communicating and engaging what is okay and not okay for you to experience. Boundaries are so important. Again, if we don't know this about ourselves, we are either going to walk all over other people's boundaries, or we're going to let people walk all over our boundaries and then be mad either way, be reactionary either way, when that is going on. For us, we are the only ones who can engage our boundaries. It's nobody's responsibility to honor my boundaries. It is only my responsibility to engage my boundaries and honor them for myself and show up for me in those ways. So affirmational, loving self-talk, affirmations are so important. Again, out of the trauma, out of the toxic shame, we were given a lot of negative, critical, judgmental messages about ourselves. And not one of them are true, because all of them were learned out of harm. None of the messages that came out of trauma are true. They were all learned out of harm, and they were all placed there because of the trauma that was going on. So I used to have a little pen back in the early days when I was first working with codependents, and it said, "Shame is the lies somebody told you about yourself." And so I used to have that in my office, or I'd wear it sometimes if I went different places. But, before I was lovingly allowing other people to have their viewpoints, I was doing that. But affirmational self-talk, loving self-talk is so important. The more we can tell ourselves in a loving way, the truth about ourselves in a loving and affirming way, the more we have feelings that go along with that, and it helps us to put the actions in place. So then we become that more and more. We are able to pick up some of these tools and use them more and more if we're talking to ourselves in a loving way. I was raised by a lot of coaches, and most of the way that coaching was done back in the day was through shame. That never got me to do anything better. I was afraid of my coaches, so I'd try to do better because I was afraid of them. but it never inspired me. It never, that word comes from, inspiration and being inspired from within, which I think comes from my higher power. But so when we're in affirmational, loving self-talk, we are inspiring ourselves from within to pick up these tools, to use them, to be much more loving people to ourselves and others. So we also want to be able to be accountable to ourselves and to tell ourselves the truth. Being accountable, I work with lots of couples, and I always tell people, tell on yourself. We all make mistakes. There's nobody out there that doesn't. The shame wants to say, don't tell on yourself, because then you're going to be told how wrong you are and how bad you are, and then it's going to validate that shame. But it is self-affirming when we can tell on ourselves. It's like, you know what? I made a mistake. This is part of my stuff I brought into this relationship. And so I want to own that, be accountable for it. This is how I'm feeling about it, that I made that mistake. But I know that I am a loving person. I'm not wanting to treat you this way, so we clean it up. We work our 10th step in a very loving way. Number 5, 12-step recovery, therapy workshops, coaching, self-help events, anything that adds to our healthy growth and evolution. We're evolving day by day by day by day with every new experience that we have. So if we are taking that, that negative self-talk and applying that in our lives, then we are, codependence is progressive, just like any other addiction. Then we're just going to progress in our codependence. If we are on the other side of that, practicing more and more being loving to ourselves and to others, that is progressive as well. And so we will evolve more and more into greater ways and opportunities to be able to love ourselves and to love others. Number 6, practicing loving forgiveness for our past and present mistakes. This one was, for me as a mom, was probably the hardest thing for me to work with. I got to a place where in my past adult relationships, I was able to forgive myself, again, that emotionally untying. But when it came to my kids, I kept replaying all the mistakes I made, which I made a lot of mistakes with my kids. I was an active addict for a period of time. And then for the early years of my codependence recovery, I was in and out of the past and the future and I wasn't the most present parent during that time. And so that was the hardest place for me to really forgive myself. And I kept working on it, finally got to a place of being able to emotionally untie from that and to be able to forgive myself and, of course, making amends to my children for the mistakes that I had made. But then letting that go. Sometimes as a parent, and I did this a few times, where it's like, I know I screwed up as a parent, and I'm so sorry, and so the attention's more on me than it is about them and being able to make the amends there. And so being able to get to that place to where the attention, whoever it is, whether it's children or another person, that I am able to be forgiving of them for my past and present mistakes. And I'm able to forgive myself in there for my past and present mistakes. So number 7, developing a loving relationship with the family within, with our loving higher self that is just automatically connected to our higher power. You can name that however you need to name that fits for you. That loving self-parent that puts everything into action. Again, put the loving self-parent is who engages all the loving, healthy tools, behaviors, thoughts, all of that. Our loving adult, which is going to be the computer. So I always joke that I had, Windows 1953, and I keep having to reboot it into the current year, kind of thing. But we want to be able to change our thinking. We can totally go through and rewire our brains. We have that ability. God gave us that ability, to be able to do that, and it happens. And then the loving child, the loving teen. My teen was always a little bit more challenging to love than the little girl, because my teen was the one that engaged in that part of me, would engage in all of my addictions, and especially all of my addictions would show up in that way and want to be rebellious and avoidant and self-centered and all those different things. And so that part of me was a little bit harder to love, but I developed a loving relationship with her. The little girl inside, I developed a loving relationship with her. Now, when I first started doing inner child work, those parts of me did not trust me because I did not have a loving self-parent on board. I did not have this loving family within on board. In fact, my self-parent was nowhere to be found. I learned how to grab onto some power when I was a teenager and be very self-sufficient. Realized at that time nobody was going to be there. No one was going to help me out. I was on my own. And so I got very self-sufficient at that time. Well, I carried that into my 20s, into my 30s, being very self-sufficient, and I don't need you. Thank you very much. And, that's a hard place to have a relationship, because I have Ken over here saying, I would like to have a relationship with you. And I'm going, yeah, I'm good, and that was, I had to learn how to continually show up for myself in a loving way. And then as I did, I could show up for Ken in those ways and be able to have a much more loving relationship with him. So these are some examples of action steps with others. One is practicing that loving, empowered communication. So this is what I heard you say. This is how I feel about it. This is what I saw you do or not do. This is how I feel about it. This is what I would like. Are you willing to do that? This is where I made up in my head about what you were doing or saying or not doing. Is that what you meant to say or not say? Ask for clarification. Loving, empowered communication. It's looking for a win-win in the communication. It's not looking for a debate. It's not looking for, I'm going to prove my point. It's looking for a loving way to get to solution and communication, and communicating from our hearts. So number 2, engaging and communicating your boundaries. If I didn't sit down with Ken and share with him what was okay or not okay for me to experience, there's no way he's going to know that. It is my job to communicate that, especially to the people that are closest to me, so that we can develop relationship. Now if I'm out there, I'm, maybe at a 12-step meeting or out in an event somewhere, and there's somebody that I don't know that, maybe will come up and say something or do something that is not okay for me to experience. It is my job in a loving way, not in a shaming way, to be able to communicate that. So no matter what, we are the ones, that loving self-parent is who engages and communicates our boundaries. It's nobody else's responsibility to honor those things. So practice your sharing boundaries and listening boundaries when communicating. So a little bit what that means is when I'm sharing, there's a quote that I saw by Pia Melody in both of these that I just really love, and I'm paraphrasing. So she said it, much more clear in hers. But when you're doing sharing boundaries, that you are recognizing that you are sharing a part of your heart with somebody else, that you're showing up and allowing them to see you by sharing. And so, but you do that without any expectations of outcome. You're giving this gift to the relationship. The listening boundaries is that you practice with listening, that I am acknowledging this person is doing the best job they can to communicate their feelings with me, as long as they're done appropriately, that they are communicating their feelings with me. Whether I like those feelings or not, whether I agree with them or not, I need to acknowledge that they are doing the best they can do to communicate that they're giving me a gift of who they are. And I like that. For me, when I remember when I read that, it's like, okay, this is a way to look at this in a much different way when I'm sharing or when I'm listening to someone share their feelings. So number 4, treat others as you would like to be treated, with love and respect, even if you don't agree with them. 5, lovingly allow others to be themselves with their choices, their lives, their decisions, even if you don't like them or agree with them. I think that is such a challenge in our world today, for people to lovingly allow others to be themselves without judgment. Number 6, remember always that you are interacting with another human being that may have their wounds, that may have their hurts, that has their past. I always think of that, like in communication, it's like, that motivation to be able to communicate in a loving way is remembering I'm talking to another creation of God. Would I want to be talked to that way? No, now I think we all can get inappropriate at times or not be the clearest or any of that type of thing. So we're able to come back and make amends and clean things up with people. But to the best of our ability, it's remembering that this is another creation of God, another creation of our higher power that I am talking to. So giving them that respectful love that I would want. Number 7, practice forgiveness. Forgiveness is just, again, I think so important for us to be able to move forward and let go. That what I was sharing earlier, that Aramaic word for forgiveness, which is shah, and means to untie. So emotionally untie from others, so that we're not carrying baggage of resentments around with us, baggage of hurts around with us, baggage of angers and fears and all those. We're not carrying all that heavy baggage with us all the time, or about ourselves, that we are lovingly emotionally untying from that and letting it go, giving it to our higher power and letting it go. I think is a powerful practice to be doing. So this is, I think I said something in my email, there was going to be a little love challenge. So just to give you some background on this, in 2016, when there was a lot of, political upheaval at that time, not that that was the first time, there's been a lot of that, since beginning of time. But anyways, there was so much negativity, and maybe I was just noticing it because I was trying to be more on the other side of it, that I created a website called ivoteforlove.net. And so just some writings that are in there, but this was a challenge that was that I put up. And so I will read this to you. You're welcome to engage in this challenge or not. We're inviting you to a challenge to all who want to join in, a challenge to love. Want to join? Okay, then just begin to think loving thoughts, treat others with love, respect, kindness, and compassion. Practice loving allowance for all. And for those of you who would choose to show your love financially, donate to a favorite charity, or give $1, a meal, a pair of shoes to those less fortunate. Love is the language of the heart. Love is the action of the heart. I Vote for Love is about a daily choice towards love and loving, Let's put a little love into our lives and share that towards everyone we see, if not in our action, then in our thoughts and in our hearts. So I would challenge you all with that, and practicing that for yourselves as well as doing that for others. I think there's so many ways to put love into action, and so we can be really creative with all of that. So this is the assignment. One is you're going to write out one love or loving action step in each area for yourself and for someone else. So think of maybe just one person instead of different people for each of these.
Again, write out one love or loving action step in each of the 5 areas for yourself or others. The 5 areas being physical, emotional, intellectual, sexual, and spiritual. Thank you for attending my workshop. I appreciate you being here and the support that you show with the workshops. I hope they were helpful, and I look forward to seeing you at the next one.